The stars had always been silent. For thousands of years, the galaxy had learned one truth: do not provoke humanity. It wasn't because humans had the strongest weapons. It wasn't because they commanded the largest fleets. It was because when the universe expected them to kneel, they stood. When the logical choice was to surrender, they fought. And when everything seemed lost, humans did something no species could predict. But Imperium Harzul didn't believe in myths. The first fight came at 02:47 a.m. Earth Standard Time. There was no declaration, no demands. It was swift, calculated, and designed to eradicate resistance before it could begin. The skies over North America, Europe, and Asia lit up as plasma fire rained down. Lincoln Fox was already awake when it happened. Pilots had a habit of waking up before dawn, an instinct carved into them through years of early deployments. But today, the air felt wrong. The static hum of his radio, usually full of routine chatter, was dead silent. His gut twisted. Then, the emergency broadcast kicked in. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Earth is under impact. Report to your nearest military installation immediately. Evacuation protocols are in effect. Do not engage the enemy directly. Repeat. The message cut out as the first explosion rocked the base. Lincoln barely had time to grab his flight suit. Ground crews shouted orders. Alarms blared. And mechanics scrambled to arm whatever aircraft they could. But it was hopeless. The fight was too fast, too overwhelming. That's when he saw it, the sky splitting apart. A massive Sharzul warship, black as midnight, hovered above them, its silhouette blocking out the stars. It wasn't sleek or elegant like the ships in sci-fi movies. Someone screamed. Someone else prayed. Lincoln didn't do either. He didn't have time. Captain Fox, a voice barked over the comms. Your jet's hot. Get in the air. Now! He didn't need to be told twice. Within seconds, he was sprinting across the tarmac, his boots slamming against the pavement. Thunderbolt X, the prototype fighter he'd been testing for months, was waiting, sleek, experimental, and barely combat-ready. But it didn't matter. He vaulted into the cockpit, slammed the canopy shut, and ignited the engines. The roar of the afterburners drowned out the screams on the radio. Then, without hesitation, he launched straight. The moment he breached the atmosphere, his breath caught. The battle for Earth had already begun. Hundreds of Sharzul warships loomed over the planet. The remnants of Earth's fleet, fighter jets, even repurposed shuttles, fought back with everything they had. And yet, it wasn't enough. Lincoln saw it in real time. And through it all, the Sharzul remained silent. Gritting his teeth, Lincoln dove straight into the fray alone. The enemy didn't notice him at first. His ship was too small, too insignificant for their massive fleet to track. That was their first mistake. He locked onto the closest warship, Act. A heartbeat later, the warship erupted in a violent chain reaction, and for the first time since the attack began, silence fell over the battlefield. Lincoln let out a sharp exhale, gripping the controls so tightly his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded. His body screamed at him to turn back. But instead, he grinned. Grinned because, for the first time since this battle began, the enemy had finally noticed him. And when the Harzul realized what had just happened, they did something no one had ever seen before. They hesitated. That was their second mistake. Lincoln opened a direct channel, ignoring the frantic warnings from the command, ignoring the fact that he was now completely alone, the only human pilot still flying in this section of space. And then, he spoke 3 words that changed the course of history. Come get me. The moment Lincoln uttered those 3 words, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, the Harzul fleet moved. Their ships shifted course, massive cruisers turning with eerie precision, their dark hulls gleaming against the distant sun. Thousands of attack drones toward him. Every warning system in his cockpit flared to life, missile locks, proximity alarms, heat signatures, each one screaming the same truth. He was completely and utterly outnumbered. But he didn't care. Lincoln inhaled sharply, eyes burning with focus. His fingers tightened around the controls, his muscles coiling like a spring. He didn't have a plan. He didn't need one. Instinct and training would think of him. He yanked the throttle, sending Thunderbolt X into a brutal spin, plummeting through the chaos of battle with terrifying speed. Plasma fire ripped past his canopy, barely missing him by inches. He twisted, rolled, dove, moving faster than his thoughts. The Sharzul pursued, their sleek interceptors closing in, locking onto his position. One missile shot past his wing, Another detonated just behind him, sending shockwaves through the hull. He grinned. They were trying too hard. At the last possible second, he cut all thrust. The Thunderbolt stalled midair, the sudden loss of velocity throwing off the alien targeting systems. In that fraction of a second, as the Harzul fighter shot past him, he struck back. His fingers danced across the control, triggering a spread of counterfire. The weapon exploded in a flash of silver and blue, their remains spiraling into the black void. "That's one," he muttered. Then, the second wave came. It wasn't just fighters anymore. The warships had recalibrated, their heavy cannons now tracking his exact location. They weren't trying to act anymore. Before he could react, the Thunderbolt spun violently, alarms blaring, warning lights flashing red. Lincoln gritted his teeth, yanking at the controls, fighting the G-forces as he struggled to regain stability. But the damage was real. His ship was bleeding air. He exhaled sharply. This was it. Then, if he was going down, he might as well go down swinging. Gritting his teeth, he rerouted power to the remaining thrusters. He could hear the panicked voices over the radio, his commanding officer screaming at him to retreat, to eject, to do anything other than what he was about to do. But Lincoln Fox had never run from a fight in his life. Just as he prepared to launch his final act, his cockpit display flickered. A new signal appeared. Not from the fleet, not from command, from Earth. Static crackled. Then, a voice broke through. "That is Maria. Hold the hell on, Fox." His breath caught. Weapon-carved neon trails through the heavens, striking the Harzul formation with pinpoint precision. Somewhere in the chaos, and at the front of it all, leading the fight, was Maria Torres. Her voice came through again, steady, unshaken, filled with that same impossible defiance. "I swear to God, Fox, if you're not alive for being a reckless idiot, I'm going to be pissed." Lincoln barked out a laugh, something raw and desperate and full of life. His hands flew across the controls, stabilizing his ship just as the reinforcements tore into the battlefield. The tide had turned, and for the first time since this nightmare began, the Harzul were no longer advancing. They were falling back. Lincoln didn't have time to celebrate. The Harzul might have hesitated, but they weren't beaten. His HUD flickered, scanning the battlefield. The reinforcements had evened the odds, but only slightly. The Harzul fleet was still massive, and their warships, though momentarily disoriented, were already regrouping. Their command ships were moving into a new formation, adjusting their tactics in land earning. They weren't used to resistance, but they were adapting, fast. Then, the real problem revealed itself. From the depths of space, beyond the battlefield, a new signature appeared, larger, heavier, darker. The moment his sensors locked onto it, it was the flagship of the Harzul warlord, a behemoth the size of a city. Its hull bristling with enough firepower to wipe Earth off the map with a single coordinated strike. "Command, do you see this?" Maria's voice came through, sharp and calm. "They just dropped their ace on the board." Lincoln clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was a warning. The Harzul were done playing. This was the part where they stopped treating humanity like an annoyance and started treating them like a danger. The comms buzzed. A deep, guttural voice cut through the static, a voice that didn't belong to any human. "You have defied the Imperium." The words slithered through the air like a living thing, heavy with ancient arrogance. "You believe your defiance matters, that your resistance means something. It does not." Then, with horrifying precision, the Harzul fired. The blast came from the warlord's flagship, a beam of pure energy, wider than a city block, streaking down toward Earth with merciless intent. It wasn't targeting a military installation. It's not a strategic point. It was heading straight for a civilian population center. Lincoln's breath caught. His fingers moved before his mind could. He yanked the throttle, diving. The Thunderbolt X roared as it broke through the stratosphere, its damaged wing shaking violently. The heat from atmospheric re-entry burned against the cockpit glass, alarms screaming in protest. The beam was already slicing through the clouds, carving a path of light toward the city below. He had seconds. He rerouted every ounce of power into the Thunderbolt's experimental drive. The failsafe warnings went wild. System integrity plummeted. If he pulled this off, there was no coming back. Maria's voice came through the comms, raw with something he'd never heard before, fear. "Lincoln, What the hell are you doing? He didn't answer. At the last possible moment, just as the energy beam tore toward the surface, he twisted his ship into a vertical climb. Everything went white. For a moment, there was no sound, no feeling, just pure, blinding light. Then impact. The Thunderbolt X detonated inside the energy wave, rupturing the blast before it could reach the city. Shock waves rippled outward, the sheer force enough to send Harzul warships reeling. And then, silence. Maria's scream ripped through the comms. Lincoln! But there was nothing. The Thunderbolt was gone. The pilot with it. Above, the Harzul flagship hovered, momentarily stunned. They had never seen something like this before, a species willing to sacrifice themselves, not for victory, but for the sheer refusal to let their enemy win. Then, from the ruins of the explosion, something moved. It is Lincoln. His emergency eject system had barely activated before the impact, the force knocking him unconscious as he plummeted toward Earth, his body cut through the sky like a fallen star. Maria was already moving. I got him! Cover me! She barked, her fighter breaking formation. Behind her, Harzul warships started reorienting, recovering from the chaos. Plasma fire filled the sky again, but she didn't care. All that mattered was catching Lincoln before he hit the ground. She pushed her jet harder than it was ever meant to go, air resistance screaming against the hull. The targeting systems tried and failed to lock onto his falling form. She didn't have a precise read, just one instinct. She killed the engines for a split second and then impacted with her cockpit. Lincoln slammed into the emergency catch frame, barely held in place by the jet's gravity dampeners. His body was limp, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. Maria exhaled hard. Then, through gritted teeth, she growled into the comms. Command, this is Lieutenant Torres. Fox is alive. A pause. Then, a quiet, stunned voice from Mission Control. What the hell just happened? Maria glared up at the Harzul flagship, still hovering, watching.
They tried to challenge us,
she said, voice ice cold. Then, she acts. Earth's forces surged forward, capitalizing on the chaos. Fighter squadrons weaved between enemy formations, unleashing missile barrages that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Ground-based artillery installations, thought to be outdated, lit up the night like a second sunrise. The sky itself seemed to shatter under the sheer fury of human defiance. But the Harzul weren't broken yet. The warlord's flagship adjusted, realigning its massive cannons. The first shot had been a warning. The next would be the final. Maria saw it coming before the sensors even registered the charge-up sequence. Her hands clenched the controls so hard her knuckles went white. She didn't even think, she just reacted. But before she could move, a voice crackled through the comms, weak and rough. Torres, you're in my seat. Her breath caught. Lincoln's voice. The sound of something that should have been impossible. Her radar flickered. A new contact. A single heat signature, rising fast from the surface. Then, out of the inferno below, a new ship rocketed into the fight. Sleek, black, built for war. Maria didn't recognize it. No one did. Because it wasn't supposed to exist. The comms crackled again. Take this beauty from the black site in Nevada, Lincoln admitted. His voice filled with that infuriating, impossible grin. Turns out we have been sitting on some toys they didn't think we'd need. Figured now's a good time. Maria exhaled sharply. A rare laugh. You crazy. Good to see you too, Torres. Then, Lincoln throttled forward, straight toward the flagship. The Harzul didn't hesitate this time. They opened fire immediately, unleashing everything they had. Plasma bolts, missile swarms, high-energy cannons. The void itself became a storm of death. Lincoln flew straight into it. His new fighter, a classified prototype known only as Valkyrie, danced through the carnage. It wasn't just faster than the Thunderbolt X. It was something else entirely. The ship didn't just react to his movements. It anticipated them. It moved like a living thing, weaving through the barrage with almost supernatural precision. The Harzul adjusted, recalibrated, and tried to trap him in a kill box. But it didn't matter. Lincoln was already inside their formation, and now he was pissed. His weapon systems locked onto the warlord's command ship. He wasn't just trying to damage it. He was going to tear it out of the sky. Command, he said, get ready to light those up. Maria didn't even need to ask what he was planning. You better make it out of this, Fox. I don't plan on dying today. And then, he acts. The warlord's ship shuddered, its hull cracking under the pressure. The Sharzul had never taken damage like this before. But it wasn't enough. The warlord, despite everything, was still standing. He pushed forward, closing the gap between himself and the flagship until he was nearly skimming its hull. The ship's external cannons couldn't track him this close. And then, Lincoln ejected. The Valkyrie kept flying, its autopilot locked onto the warlord's ship, charging forward at full burn. The Sharzul barely had time to react. The explosion was biblical. The warlord's ship was gone. Lincoln, meanwhile, twisted in the air, trying to orient himself, and Maria was there. Her fighter dipped beneath him, catching him again. The moment his boots hit the hull, he gripped the side of the cockpit, panting. Maria turned, looking at him through the glass, an unreadable expression on her face. You don't want to live, don't you? Lincoln grinned. Nah, just like proving aliens wrong. Below them, Earth's forces surged. The Sharzul, the leader disoriented, began to fall back. The battle wasn't just turning. Humanity was winning. The Sharzul were retreating. It didn't happen all at once. Conquerors never truly understood the concept of fear, not until it was too late. Lincoln sat slumped in Maria's fighter, his breathing heavy. He watched as the Sharzul ships, once so confident in their dominance, began their retreat. Some tried to cover their escape with scattered fire, but Earth's forces were relentless. Below them, Earth was still standing. Then, the final transmission came through from the galaxy, a single, stark message, broadcast across every surviving comm channel, translated into every human language. Attention, people of Earth. You have defied the Sharzul. You have survived where others have fallen. The Council recognizes your strength, your resilience, and your message is clear. You are no longer prey. Lincoln's grip tightened around the harness. There was no celebration in his eyes, no laughter, just a quiet, undeniable truth. They had never been prey. The rest of the galaxy was just too blind to see it. Maria glanced at him over her shoulder. You hear that, Fox? We just became a galactic superpower in under 24 hours. He smirked, shaking his head. Hell of a way to introduce ourselves. The galaxy now knew what Earth was. What were humans? The war was over. The legend of Earth had just begun.